Chapter 19 will be our skeletal system. We'll talk about all of the things about bones and the inside of how we're built. So you're probably familiar that we have 206 bones, but we're actually born with whereas we're being created, we have over 300 bones, and then as we progress, we fuse bones together when we're in utero and after we're born, and now we come down to 206. Sometimes people will say there's 208, depends on the text or the person that you are reading from, because we have two little sesamoid bones, but we'll talk about those bones later. So this bone chapter is really how our whole framework is made up. In every chapter that we are going to have going forward, there will be the physiology or the functions of that particular body system that we are covering. So for this chapter, it's on page 370, it's going to list out all of the different functions or the physiology that are important and you definitely need to be familiar with, especially for our blood cell production. That happens, our blood cells are created inside our bones. The anatomy of a bone is more than just it has this hard outer shell. We have a type of connective tissue. What is the bone? We learned that in the previous chapter. But we have the spongy and the compact bones. And what's inside is what we're going to look at within that. So some of the definition of compact and spongy bones on page 370. So this is just a breakdown of the difference between those. But then we're going to dive into what's inside the pictures that are on page 371. Here's an up-close personal of the things about the compact bone that you need to make sure that you are aware of, as well as the spongy bone. So we have bones that are maturing. So we have ways that these cells have to actually do their thing. So osteoblast is when the cell is forming the bone or bone forming cells. Osteocytes are when they mature. And then osteoclast is the bone destroying cells. So this is the bone tissue, and each cell within there has these parts within it. Ossification is when our bone tissue is being developed by those osteoblasts, and this is up until our body is no more. So we have a full adult stature that is achieved at some point in our life, but our bone repair and bone remodeling is happening all throughout our lives. We know that we have many different types of bones within our body. You're probably familiar with seeing these pictures. This is on the top of page 372. The classifications of the size and shape is on 372 and on to 373. I want you to make sure that you're aware of all of these names and an example of what that bone is. So the long, the short, the flat, the irregular, the sesamoid. Here you can see I have written out all of the definitions of the parts of the long bone that I need you to be familiar with. The view is on page 371, but the definitions are on page 373, starting with the middle part of the long bone. So just where and how each of these are located, all the way down to the epiphyseal line. So all of these definitions you need to be familiar with, but know that that picture that's on 371 might help you as you're reading through those definitions. In the previous chapter, we had a little overview of the different regions of our skeleton. We talked about the axial and the appendicular, Here is a further definition on page 373 of what these are. And when you look at the pictures that are on 374 and 375 or on this screen, you can see the different color area of the skeleton is defining. The blue is the axial, and the tan or the brownish color, that is your appendicular. You definitely need to be aware of what bones are located in which skeletal region. You don't have to memorize them. For example, for the axioskeleton, you just need to know that that's the skull, the vertebral column, the ribs, and the sternum. Or if you choose, you could memorize all of them, but that's a lot of memorizing, and you have much more to think about. The joints of our body. We know we have lots of joints, so just where bones are joining together, I want you to know what the definition of a joint is. And the reason why we need our joints and why we need to keep our joints moving. So on the bottom of page 376, we have this little view of some of the examples of the different types of joints. We can see on the top of 376 and on the 377 that joints can be classified by their structure or their function. So fibrous joints are also resembling a synarthritic joint. You need to be familiar with both of those terms and definitions. The cartilaginous joint resembles the amphithritic joint, and the synovial joint resembles the diarthritic joint. Again, those definitions on 376 and 377. And again, just a brief overview of remembering these classifications and these terms. Synovial joint is one of the definitions. So these are when there is a dense fibrous joint capsule. So the synovial joint, we have a little extra that we need to learn about. These are part of the ones that are definitely freely movable within our body. These are the ones that we think of at our knee, for example. So we're going to learn a little bit more about these terms. So this is pictured on the bottom of 377. And the terms that I have written next to there, the joint capsule, the ligament, articular cartilage, the labrum, joint cavity, synovial membrane, and synovial fluid, those are defined on starting on 377. They go on to 378. But just the different areas and important parts of the structure for the synovial joint that you definitely need to be familiar with. Within a synovial joint, we also have some accessory structures. This picture is on page 378, but it's just giving us an example of where some bursa are located in our body. But the terms that are in that paragraph completely on page 378, the fat pad, the bursa, synovial sheath, and the meniscus, please make sure that you know those definitions as well. I just don't have pictures in this book to show you of those. On the top of page 379 is all of the different types of synovial joints that go along with the body movement. So we have several different types of joints that are providing all of the movement within our body. So the little table that is on page 379 will help you with the hinge, the pivot, the saddle, etc., all of those terms where the movement is, and also that table gives you an example of where these type of joints are. I promise you that is something that you definitely need to be familiar with all of these terms, the type of movement that they have within them, and an example of where they are located. Our synovial joints also are not only providing movement all throughout our body, but they're also providing us with some painless noises, or let's hope they're painless. So this is on page 380 where it gives us the term crepitus, and so just some definitions of that cracking of knuckles or the popping that happens maybe when someone is going down the stairs. So just what that actually is. on pages 380 all the way through 384, the book gives you definitions and pictures of all of the terms that you need to begin using within your terminology. Instead of just raising your arm out to the side, you could think of that as being abduction of your glenohumeral joint. So just as we move forward, become familiar with all of these terms from flexion and extension all the way down to excursion and what they are. So these pictures hopefully will help you with that.